After the great enemy ship exploded, the battlefield went silent for a few moments. Even the enemy stopped firing. Smoke filled the air. Pieces of metal fell from the sky like burning rain. The Jirathi hive had just won its first major victory, and it was because of both the queen and a human. Elias stood with Drexel and Queen Kael'vara on a high rock. He was dirty, tired, and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he still smiled. "Now that was terrifying," he said, wiping blood from his face. "You fought well," the queen said, her voice calm but proud. "Not like a human, like a warrior." Elias looked at her. That almost sounded like a compliment. Kael'vara didn't answer, but her eyes glowed softly, and for once she didn't hiss or threaten to crush him. The hive cheered. Hundreds of drones, warriors, and workers raised their claws and clicked loudly, a sign of deep respect. They weren't just celebrating victory. They were celebrating Elias. He was no longer an outsider. He was now one of them. Later, the queen held a gathering in the central chamber. Every high-ranking Jirathi was present. Fires burned in deep pits. The walls pulsed with biolight. Elias was called forward. Kael'vara stood above him on her throne. "For the first time in our history," she said, her voice echoing, "a creature not born of the hive has stood beside us in battle. He risked his life. He fought with honor, and he made us see strength in a different way." The chamber was silent. "Elias, of Earth," she continued, "you are now blood-bound to the hive. You may not look like us, but your heart is Jirathi." The warriors shouted in agreement. Elias stepped forward, surprised and humbled. I don't know what to say." Kael'vara looked down at him. "Say nothing. You already proved everything." She reached out with one long claw and touched his shoulder. It was a sacred gesture. It meant trust. After the ceremony, Drexel brought him food and drink, strange glowing fruits and sizzling meat. "You are family now," Drexel said. "I'm honored," Elias replied, "even if your food still tastes weird." Drexel laughed, a dry clicking sound. Later, Elias stood alone outside the hive, looking up at the stars. So much had changed. He had come here to stop a war, and now he was part of one. But something inside him felt right. He belonged here. Footsteps behind him. It was the queen. "You still call me cute," she said. Elias grinned. "Can't help it. You're terrifying and powerful, but still, kinda adorable." She stared at him for a long time. "Careful, human," she said, stepping closer. "You're growing on me." Elias laughed. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Her wings rustled. "Perhaps it's not." Above them, stars shined brighter, but something darker moved in the distance, because even though they had won this battle, the war was not over yet. The stars above Jirathi space looked peaceful, but they were not. Another wave of enemy ships had entered the system, bigger, stronger, and faster. They came with fury, not for land or resources, but for revenge. This time, the entire hive was ready, and so was Elias. He stood inside the main war chamber with Queen Kael'vara and Drexel. A map floated in the air, showing red enemy marks moving fast. "They outnumber us 5-1, Drexel said. "We must protect the Queen's chamber at all costs," said one of the generals. Kael'vara turned to Elias. "Your human people will not come?" she asked. "I sent a signal," Elias replied. "But Earth is far. They may not reach us in time." Kael'vara nodded. "Then we do not wait, we fight." Elias put on his armor one last time. It was scratched and dented, but it felt right. He tightened the straps, checked his blaster, and looked at Drexel. "Let's give them a welcome they'll never forget." The final battle began in the dark of space. The hive launched ships like flying spears. Jirathi drones swarmed the enemy, moving with deadly grace. Elias rode in the lead ship with Kael'vara and Drexel, all of them working together as one. Enemy missiles lit the sky. Explosions shook the stars. A giant enemy cruiser fired toward the Queen's ship. Elias saw it coming. "We won't dodge that," Drexel shouted. "I've got an idea," Elias said, "but it's very human." He took control of the side guns and aimed at a nearby asteroid. "What are you doing?" Kael'vara demanded. "Shooting rocks." Elias grinned. He fired, breaking the asteroid into dozens of sharp fragments. They flew right into the path of the enemy missile. Boom. The blast was blocked. Drexel stared in shock. "That was clever." "That was crazy," Kael'vara said. "I like it." The battle grew worse. One by one, ships were falling. The hive was strong, but the enemy had numbers. Then, from the distance, bright lights, human ships, dozens of them coming fast. Elias's eyes widened. They came! The humans joined the fight, forming a wall with Jarathi ships. Earth pilots and Jarathi drones fought side by side. Enemies, who once feared each other, now trusted each other. The tide turned. With both species fighting as one, the enemy began to retreat. Ship by ship, they were pushed back into space, until finally, the last cruiser exploded. The war was over. Back in the hive, celebrations echoed through every tunnel. Elias stood before the Queen. His uniform was torn, his arm in a sling, but he was smiling. "We did it," he said. Kael'vara stepped closer. "No," she said, "we did it." She raised her claw and placed it gently on his chest. "You are Jarathi now, forever." Elias looked up at her, his voice soft. "Does that mean I can still call you cute?" Kael'vara's eyes glowed. "Only if you want to live dangerously." They both laughed. And so, in a galaxy full of danger and war, a human and an alien queen stood side by side, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as warriors, allies, and something even more. Every day in the Jarathi hive was a new challenge for Elias. The hive never slept. Warriors trained in the dark. Workers repaired walls with glowing paste. Drones buzzed through the tunnels like living machines. Elias felt like a mouse in a nest of hornets, but he refused to give up. Today, Drexel took him to the arena of strength, where Jarathi warriors tested combat skills. The arena floor was hard rock, stained with dark marks from past fights. "You must face a training drone," Drexel told him. "A fight?" Elias asked. "I don't even have a weapon." Drexel clicked. "You are the weapon, or you are nothing." The drone he had to face wasn't huge, but it was fast. It had sharp claws and thick armor. As the crowd of Jarathi gathered to watch, Elias stepped into the ring. He was terrified, but he smiled anyway. "Let's dance, Bugbot," he whispered. The drone rushed at him. Elias dodged to the side, barely avoiding a slash to his chest. He didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a human. He ducked, rolled, grabbed rocks, and used them as tools. He wasn't strong, but he was clever. The crowd laughed at first. Then they watched more closely. When Elias finally jumped onto the drone's back and pulled out a wire, the machine collapsed. He stood, breathing hard, cuts on his arms, blood on his shirt. The Jarathi were silent, then someone clicked, then another. The sound spread like fire. They were clapping. Jarathi style. Drexel looked proud. "You used your mind, not just muscle." "That is rare." Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. "Brains over brawn, that's how humans survive." Later, Elias was allowed into the brood nursery, a sacred area where young larvae grew. No outsider had ever been inside, but the Queen had given special permission. The young Jarathi crawled and clicked at Elias, curious about the soft alien, who smelled strange. One even climbed onto his back. He didn't panic. He just laughed. Drexel looked confused. "You are not afraid of our young?" "They remind me of puppies," Elias said, patting one gently. Creepy, spiky puppies, but still. At the far end of the nursery, Queen Calvara stood silently, watching through the shadows. She had expected the human to fail, to fear, to run. But he didn't. He bled for the hive. He laughed with the drones. He risked himself to make peace. And worst of all, the hive was beginning to like him. She clenched her claws. This human was dangerous, not because of strength, but because of his heart, his madness, his charm. And still, he kept calling her cute whenever he saw her. One day, she thought, he will stop that nonsense. But deep inside, she wasn't sure if she wanted him to. Days passed. Elias no longer felt like a complete outsider in the Zirathi hive. The warriors still stared, the workers still whispered, but they no longer hissed at him when he walked by. Some even nodded as he passed. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was something close. He had trained in their arenas, eaten their strange food, learned their war songs, and studied their language. He still got cut, bruised, and confused nearly every day, but he never gave up. And the hive noticed. One evening, Drexel took him to the outer walls, where the youngest drones trained with real weapons. It was dangerous. Accidents were common. Injuries, even death, were not unusual. This is where the hive becomes strong, Drexel explained. Only the bold survive. Suddenly, an alarm rang out. A young drone screamed. Its foot had slipped on the wall's edge during a climbing drill. It hung by one claw, too weak to pull itself up. Below it was a deep pit filled with spikes. The guards hesitated. The drop was too steep. Before anyone could react, Elias ran. He jumped onto the wall without thinking. His human hands weren't made for Zirathi stone, but he climbed anyway, faster than ever before. The rough rock tore at his skin. Blood ran down his arms. He reached the young drone just in time and grabbed it with both hands. "Got you!" Elias shouted. Using all his strength, he pulled the drone up inch by inch until both of them collapsed safely onto the ledge. The pit below stayed silent. The guards stared in shock. Drexel clicked slowly. "You saved it." "Why?" Elias winced, holding his shoulder. "Because that's what humans do." He turned to the young drone. "Next time, keep your grip tight, okay?" The drone blinked and nodded. That night, the hive whispered. Some called him reckless, others called him mad. But many began to call him something new, brother in war. Even the warrior drones who once mocked him now showed respect. They touched their foreclaws to their chests when they passed him. A few even offered him meat from their own meals, a rare honor. In the shadows above, Queen Calvara watched everything. This human, Elias, had done what no ambassador or warrior had ever done before. He had entered her world, suffered in it, and still smiled. He had risked his life not for glory, not for gain, but for a child of the hive. She felt something strange in her chest, a warmth, a flicker of pride. No, impossible. Still, she summoned him. When Elias stood before her, bruised and bleeding, she asked, "Why do you call me cute?" He grinned. "Because you are. You just don't see it." Her eyes narrowed. "I should crush you for that," she said. "But you won't." He replied softly. She didn't answer, but she didn't crush him either. The Zirathi hive was changing. Where once Elias had been called weak, soft, or foolish, now he was greeted with respect. Young drones followed him around, curious and playful. Warriors asked for his opinion. Even the harshest guards now allowed him to walk freely through sacred tunnels. And Queen Calvara? She no longer ignored him. She called him often, spoke with him, watched him. She didn't smile. Zirathi didn't smile. But her voice was less cold, and her questions were deeper. "What drives your kind?" she asked once. "Hope," Elias replied, "and maybe a little stubbornness." She didn't understand it fully, but she was beginning to. Then, without warning, everything changed. An alarm echoed through the hive, a deep, terrible sound that shook the walls. Attack. Drexel rushed into Elias's chamber. Unknown ships are landing outside the hive. Not ours. Not human either. Elias stood quickly. Who are they? No answer. But the Queen says they come with weapons. Elias followed Drexel to the command hall where Queen Kael'vara stood over a glowing map. Dozens of ships had appeared just outside Jarathi space, sleek, black, and silent. They ignore our warnings, she growled. They come close, too close. Elias stepped forward. Let me try to speak to them. The Queen turned. They already fired upon one of our satellites. This is no greeting. A Jarathi officer clicked. They will strike again. We must defend the hive. Elias looked at the Queen. Let me go. Maybe I can talk to them before war starts. Kael'vara stared at him. You would risk your life again? Elias nodded. If I can stop bloodshed, yes. She paused. Her claws twitched. Then finally she said, Take a scout ship. You have one chance. Moments later, Elias flew toward the strange ships in a small Jarathi vessel, accompanied by 2 drone guards. As they neared the enemy, a message crackled through. You are in restricted space. Identify yourself. Elias took a deep breath. This is Dr. Elias Vance of Earth. I come in peace. A moment of silence. Then the voice returned, cold and sharp. Earth? You are allies of the insect scum now? Elias narrowed his eyes. They're not scum. And yes, I stand with them. The voice laughed. Then you'll fall with them. Without warning, the ships opened fire. Red beams lit the sky. Elias's scout ship dodged hard, but one blast clipped the wing. Warning lights flashed. Retreat, one of the drones shouted. No, Elias yelled. We go back, but we bring a message. When they returned to the hive, smoke trailing from their ship, Elias marched straight into the Queen's chamber. They don't want peace, he said. They want a war. Kael'vara's eyes glowed brighter. Then they will learn, she said, her voice low and full of power, why the hive does not bow. She turned to her generals. Prepare for battle. And for the first time in Jarathi history, a human would fight by their side. The hive was alive with energy. Jarathi warriors marched through the tunnels, armor shining, weapons charged. Worker drones repaired defenses. The Queen's voice echoed through the hive's walls, commanding unity, strength, and loyalty. And, in the middle of it all stood Elias, bruised, tired but determined. He wore light armor made by Jarathi engineers, adjusted for his human body. It was stronger than human gear, shaped with living metals. On his wrist was a translator, and on his back was a small plasma blaster. Not much, but enough to fight. Drexel walked beside him, now taller and more confident than when they had met. You should not fight, Drexel said. You are soft. You can die easily. Elias smiled. That's true. But I'm also stubborn. You should know that by now. The Queen summoned him before the final battle. Her throne room was silent as Elias entered. You are the only human who has ever earned the hive's respect, she said. But this is war. Many will die. You may be one of them. Elias nodded. I know. She stepped down from her throne, standing just in front of him. Her voice lowered. You could leave now. Return to your ship. Save yourself. Elias looked her in the eyes. If I leave now, I'll regret it forever. You're my allies now. My friends. The Queen tilted her head. Friends? Yeah, Elias said. Strange, alien, bug-shaped friends. But friends. For a moment, Kael'vara said nothing. Then she turned to her guards. Give him full access. Let him fight where he chooses. She paused, then added softly, and make sure he survives. Outside the hive, the enemy fleet landed. Strange creatures in dark armor marched across the black sand, their weapons glowing with deadly light. They were not interested in peace. They wanted Jarathi land, power, and technology, and they would destroy anyone in their way. Elias stood, beside Drexel at the outer wall. When the enemy appeared on the horizon, the ground shook. War had begun. The Jirathi roared, a deep sound that made the rocks tremble. Elias raised his blaster and shouted with them. The first wave came fast. Energy blasts filled the air. Drones flew into battle, some falling, others striking down the enemy. Elias fired from the wall, helping where he could. He wasn't the strongest or fastest, but he was smart. He aimed carefully, moved quickly, helped injured drones, used every bit of his training. Drexel was beside him the whole time, fighting fiercely. A blast hit close. Elias was thrown backward, landing hard. His side burned, his vision blurred. Drexel pulled him behind cover. "You are injured!" Elias coughed but smiled. "Just a scratch." "You are mad," Drexel said. "Maybe," Elias replied, "but I'm your kind of mad." Above them, Queen Kalvara led the second wave, her massive figure crashing into the enemy with unstoppable force. And deep inside the hive, warriors whispered something new. "He may be human, but he is one of us now." Okay, fire, and screaming energy blasts. Bodies of both Jirathi and enemy soldiers lay scattered. The hive walls trembled with the sounds of war. But Queen Kalvara was not afraid. She moved like a storm through the enemy ranks, claws flashing, wings beating hard, her voice roaring commands to her warriors. Any enemy that came near her was either crushed or burned. This was the full power of the queen. Elias, hidden behind a broken wall with Drexel, watched her fight. "She's terrifying," he said, breathing hard. Drexel clicked. "She is our strongest. She is the hive." "I can see that," Elias muttered. "Remind me never to call her cute during battle." A group of enemy soldiers broke through a side tunnel. Elias and Drexel jumped into action. Elias fired his blaster while Drexel slashed with his claws. Together they took down the invaders one by one. But then, something unexpected happened. From the sky, a giant ship began to descend. It was larger than anything the hive had ever seen. Its shadow covered the battlefield. It landed just outside the hive and the ground shook violently. A voice came from the enemy ship, loud and cold. "Jirathi Queen, we have studied your kind. You are strong, but you will fall. Surrender now, or we destroy everything." The hive fell silent. Elias looked at the queen. She stood still, wings raised, eyes glowing like fire. Then she stepped forward and raised her voice. "You studied us? Then you should know one thing." She pointed at Elias, who was still standing, covered in dust and blood. "You could not even break a single human. And now you face 1,000 Jirathi, and one human who refuses to fall." The enemy laughed through the speakers. "A single human is no threat." Kalvara gave a small smile, barely noticeable. "You'll learn," she said. She turned to Elias. "Come with me. I need your madness now." Together they led a small team toward the enemy ship. Elias used his knowledge of human tech to find weak spots in the ship's defenses. He hacked a side panel with his portable device while the queen and her warriors fought to keep the area clear. "You have 2 minutes," she growled, covering him from blasts. Elias typed fast. "That's 1 minute more than I need." Finally, the panel clicked. A door opened. Kalvara burst inside with her warriors, tearing through guards and drones. Elias followed behind, planting a charge near the ship's power core. They escaped just in time. The ship exploded in a huge fireball, lighting up the sky. The enemy army paused, confused and afraid. The queen stood tall on a rock, her wings spread wide. "Let this be your answer," she shouted. "We are not weak. We are not alone. We are hive. And now," she looked at Elias, "we are more dangerous than ever." Dr. Elias Vance stood in the center of the Jirathi throne hall, sweating under his diplomatic uniform. The hall was massive, dark, and filled with the quiet buzz of insect-like drones watching him from the walls and ceilings. The air smelled like hot metal and ozone. He had seen pictures of the Jirathi queen before, but nothing had prepared him for the real thing. Queen Kael'vara stepped forward, towering at almost 9 feet tall. Her body was covered in deep black armor that shimmered like obsidian. Sharp, curved mandibles clicked softly as she stared down at him with 4 glowing red eyes. Behind her, her armored tail curled like a whip. Elias gulped. This is Dr. Elias Vance, representing the United Earth Coalition. The translator, Drone said in a monotone voice. He comes to speak of peace. Kael'vara tilted her head, studying the human. Her voice was deep and cold when she replied. Peace? With something so soft? The translator buzzed as it repeated her words. Elias smiled nervously. He had spent years studying alien languages, and while the translation was correct, it missed the tone. She didn't just think he was weak. She thought he was harmless. He couldn't help it. A small laugh escaped his mouth, and before he could stop himself, he muttered under his breath, Why do you look so cute? Silence fell. Every drone in the hall froze. Even the translator paused, unsure what to say. Kael'vara's eyes narrowed. What did you say, human? Elias blinked. Nothing. The translator buzzed again. He said you are cute. A deep growl rumbled from Kael'vara's chest. Her tail slammed into the floor, cracking the stone. The drones above hissed in alarm. Cute? She roared, voice echoing through the hall like thunder. You insult the queen of the Jarathi with this human mockery? Elias raised his hands quickly. No, it's not an insult. On Earth, cute can mean strong but admirable, fierce but elegant. It's a compliment. Kael'vara stepped closer, eyes burning. In our culture, that word is used for larvae, babies, weak, helpless things. Oh, Elias said quietly. That's definitely not what I meant. There was a long pause. Kael'vara stared at him for several seconds, her mandibles twitching. Elias braced for death, but instead the queen gave a strange clicking sound. It wasn't quite a growl. It wasn't laughter either. It was something curious. You are brave, she said. Or foolish. Elias smiled again, nervously. Little of both, probably. Kael'vara turned to her guards. Prepare the challenge of understanding, she said. Let us see if this soft creature is as clever as he is bold. The guards dragged Elias away, and the queen watched him go, eyes unreadable. He had insulted her, and yet something about the human made her hesitate. This was going to be interesting. Dr. Elias Vance sat on the cold floor of a glowing cell. The walls were made of smooth living stone that pulsed with faint light like a heartbeat. 2 Jarathi guards stood outside motionless. Their sharp claws and glowing eyes made them look more like monsters than soldiers. Elias sighed. Great. First contact, and I already made the queen angry. Just hours ago, he had called Queen Kael'vara cute. He hadn't meant to insult her, but clearly she had taken it the wrong way. Now he was being held prisoner under something called the Challenge of Understanding. He didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but it didn't sound like a tea party. Suddenly, the cell door opened with a deep rumble. Queen Kael'vara herself stepped inside, her presence filling the space. She didn't need weapons, she was a weapon. Elias stood up quickly. Your Majesty. Kael'vara stared at him without speaking. Her eyes scanned his face, his weak human frame, his soft skin. To her, he looked like something a Jarathi larva would play with. You continue to smile even now, she said finally. Do you not fear death? Elias shrugged. A little. But I also believe in understanding. That's why I came here. To learn. The queen stepped closer. And yet you mock me. You call me cute. It wasn't mockery, Elias replied calmly. On Earth we use that word for things we admire, even powerful things. Something can be beautiful and dangerous at the same time. Kael'vara clicked her mandibles, confused. In our language, the word for cute means weak and small. You compare me to a hatchling. Elias chuckled nervously. It's a translation problem, I guess. No, she said, voice low and sharp. It is a cultural problem. She began circling him, her tail twitching behind her. The challenge of understanding is an ancient right, she said. You will live among my people for 7 cycles. You will learn our ways. If you fail to gain the hive's respect, you will be fed to the brood. Elias blinked. Fed, like, literally? Kael'vara tilted her head. Yes. Elias sighed. Well, that's one way to learn a culture. The queen paused. He should be begging. He should be afraid. But he stood there, relaxed, even joking. Why? She leaned closer, her mandibles just inches from his face. Why are you not afraid of me? Elias met her eyes. Because fear stops learning. And because I don't think you really want to kill me. Not yet. Kael'vara stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned sharply and walked away. Release him, she told the guards. Begin the challenge. As she left, her mind buzzed with questions. This human was strange, bold, disrespectful, but interesting. Perhaps not all soft creatures were weak. Dr. Elias Vance stood at the edge of the Jirathi hive city, staring up at towers made of living stone and glowing roots. Giant insectoid creatures walked the pathways. Warriors, workers, guards. They didn't hide their stares. Some hissed. Others clicked their mandibles in disgust. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Queen Kael'vara had announced his trial loudly. Let this human survive among us, let him learn, or let him be crushed by the hive. Elias muttered to himself, so much for a quiet peace mission. A young Jirathi drone, smaller than the rest, approached him. Its armor was pale and thin, still growing. I am Drexel, it said in a sharp, chirping voice. I will guide you, if you do not slow me down. Elias smiled. Thanks. I'll try not to die too quickly. Drexel didn't respond. Humor was still lost on them. The first test came quickly. Drexel led Elias to the climbing wall of trials, a giant vertical cliff made of sharp crystal. Jirathi warriors trained there, leaping from edge to edge with speed and grace. Elias stared up at it, eyes wide. You want me to climb that? Yes, Drexel replied. Or you fail. Elias gulped. Right. He started climbing. The edges were rough and sharp. His fingers bled. His arms ached. Twice he slipped and almost fell. Jirathi above laughed, clicking their mandibles, in amusement. But he kept going. When he reached the top, bruised and breathless, Drexel looked surprised. You did not quit. I'm stubborn, Elias said, smiling through the pain. Later they entered the feast pit, where warriors ate after training. Huge tables were filled with steaming piles of strange meat and glowing fluid. It all smelled like burnt plastic and salt. Drexel handed Elias a bowl. Eat. Elias poked the meat. It twitched. He held his breath and took a bite. It was horrible. He almost threw up, but didn't. The warriors around him noticed. A few nodded in respect. One even tossed him a second piece. You learn, Drexel said later. Slowly, but you try. That is rare. Elias looked at the young drone. That's the point of this challenge, isn't it? Not just strength, willingness. Drexel tilted his head. Perhaps. That night, back in his small chamber, Elias sat quietly, wrapping his wounded hands. His body hurt, but his mind was alive. He was starting to understand the Jirathi. Not just their strength, but their pride, their rules, their order. And maybe they were starting to understand him too. Far away, Queen Kael'vara watched him through a hive-link screen. She saw him climb, eat, bleed, endure. Other species would have begged for rescue by now, but this human kept going. Strange creature, she whispered to herself. Why won't you break?